Scars on the hand still scream. They scream even when the wound is closed, even when treatment has worked, even when everyone agrees the story is over, because scars do not form when nothing was lost. A few months earlier, I visited a leprosy ashram in Amritsar with my father. There I interacted with several people affected by leprosy across almost every age group. One interaction that stayed with me was the one that I had with two women in their mid-50s. Both were mothers, they were wives, homemakers, but most importantly, quiet, resilient fighters. I asked them the usual questions first, their ages, their familial conditions, daily routines, etc. Safe and predictable ones, the questions that have rehearsed answers and very little risk. And then I asked something I had almost talked myself out of asking. I asked them, what makes you happiest? One of the ladies laughed at me. And no, it was not the casual chuckle or a brief burst of laughter. It was a guarded laugh, the kind that implicitly asked, what did you expect me to say? The woman answered, my children, and smiled. Now, as reassuring as that smile was, it also felt deliberate, as if she was trying to soften something, as if she was trying to quiet the screams that still lived in her scars. My talk is centered around this recognition, a recognition of what is left unsaid, of the pause before the answer, of the laugh that arrives too early, of the way people learn over time to compress their truth into something the world can handle. According to me, the medical treatment procedure has a circular geometry. There is the diagnosis, the treatment, and ultimately prevention. It is neat, it is efficient, and on paper it works. On paper everything works, except people. In this man-made system or model of modern medicine, success can be clearly achieved when accompanied with credibility, expertise, knowledge, basically all the mechanical attributes that a doctor must have. What this model lacks is continuation. And no, I do not mean calling patients back every month just to admire their lab reports. Although medicine is very good at admiring its own lab reports, they look very impressive, they just don't talk back. You can take my word for this, I have solid proof. My grandfather is diabetic, and like many patients, he does not fear the illness as much as he fears what the reports might ask him to give up, like gulab jamuns or kulfis. What I mean by continuation is, what happens to a person after treatment ends, not medically, but personally, socially, and practically. Many patients live after treatment, but before stability, a phase that medicine often ignores, mostly because it doesn't fit nearly into a chart. And in this phase, people do not respond clinically, they respond subjectively. According to the World Health Organization and large-scale outcome studies on chronic illness management, nearly half of patients with long-term or chronic conditions report the greatest difficulty after treatment has officially ended, not during it. This tells us that the system succeeds biologically, but there is still adjustment that is continuing privately. When someone is undergoing treatment or has just completed it, their life does not exist in isolation. There are multiple external factors at play, like their medical condition, emotional well-being, family support, financial security, and social acceptance, none of which show up neatly in a blood report, no matter how advanced the lab. While recovery is measured largely through biological markers, research in global health and the biopsychosocial model, including work synthesized in the Lancet Global Health, it shows that social and psychological factors account for a substantial proportion of long-term recovery outcomes, often estimated at over 40%. The factors with the most influence are often the ones least consistently followed up on. Now, all of these factors shape how a person reacts to illness and recovery. So over time, individuals begin to train their responses to fit their circumstances. They adjust their expectations. They redefine what comfort, progress, or even happiness looks like. Not because they are healed, but because they are learning how to live without continued care. In fact, this change is a clear reflection of how a patient evolves through their struggles. Such changes can make them happier, more withdrawn, or in some cases, emotionally cold. Cold like the guarded laugh I received in the Kusht ashram. It was a rare expression, like an echo indicating lived experiences and challenges. That was when it hit me that regardless of that woman completing her treatment, she was still unhealed. Her treatment may have been reassuringly successful, but she lost the ability to regain sensation for the rest of her life. Now, in most cases, multi-drug therapy treatments are essentially practiced to eliminate Mycobacterium leprae, which is the bacteria responsible for this disease. It cannot regenerate nerves or reverse deformities. In short, that lady was deprived of sensation, of the common ability to feel for the rest of her life, both physically and metaphorically. This is exactly what is overlooked in medicine, and trust me, practitioners are not to be blamed. The sole reason why I think this aspect of medicine is ignored is because an alternative to the current system was never accurately explored. We assume that the practical part of this study is as complete as the theoretical part of it. The harsh reality is that modern medicine has been structured to intervene, not to accompany. Cases are labeled as finite in accordance with necessity. Now, leprosy is just an example. Consider any conditions involving nerve damage, autoimmune disorders, chronic infections, or long-term metabolic diseases. In each case, medicine intervenes decisively at the point of diagnosis, applies evidence-based treatment, and monitors biological markers of success. But when the disease transitions from active to managed, the patient often transitions from supported to self-directed. What remains is a form of clinical silence. So what does this silence look like? This silence looks like a laugh that arrives before an honest answer. It looks like a pause that fills the room and then gets quickly covered. It looks like a smile that ends a conversation before it can become heavy. That woman did not refuse to answer my question. She answered it carefully. She gave me the safest version of happiness, not because it was the fullest one, but because it was the least demanding. In this stage, there are no new prescriptions, no active procedures, yet daily life continues to pose challenges that are psychological, physical, and social. These challenges are real, but they are no longer medically actionable, which often means they're politely ignored with very good intentions. Now, it's fair to add that leprosy is one exceptional case where there is not much need for the affected individual to psychologically fabricate societal challenges when stigma surrounds them already. There is a pre-existing notion about this disease that adds on to the burden. Now, one can just imagine how a patient recalibrates. They redefine normalcy. They simply try to cope with the absence of sensation and certainty. Now, over time, this recalibration, it becomes invisible. We've seen it in many forms. We saw it during COVID, when recovery was announced publicly, but fear continued privately. When people tested negative, but still checked their breathing at night, just in case, because reassurance has a short shelf life. When families reunited, yet hesitated before touching. When survivors were told they were back to normal, even as their bodies tired faster and their minds startled more easily. We see it in people living with diabetes who stop mentioning how exhausting constant vigilance is. In those with autoimmune disorders who apologize for canceling plans instead of explaining pain. In people with nerve damage who adapt so quietly that the world assumes nothing is missing. And I saw it most clearly in that woman at the leprosy ashram. This is the space my talk has been circling. Not illness, but what comes after. And this is where healthcare systems must change for solutions to happen. Post-treatment care must be embedded into healthcare systems, not treated as optional or secondary. Ending treatment is not equivalent to ending responsibility. The moment a patient transitions from active illness to managed recovery, that should be recognized as a critical phase, not a closing chapter. Psychological support, social reintegration, and long-term functional care, that should be considered part of treatment itself, not supplementary services reserved for those who actively seek them out. Now, in many cases, a lot of patients, they do not know how to articulate what they are struggling with, only that something feels unfinished. A system that waits for patients to ask for help will always arrive too late. Recovery must be measured beyond biological markers. Patient-reported outcomes such as emotional well-being, social functioning, autonomy, and quality of life must be treated as legitimate indicators of health, not subjective afterthoughts. If a patient's reports show stability, but their daily life reflects withdrawal, fear, or isolation, then that means recovery is incomplete, regardless of how successful the treatment appears on paper. Healthcare must extend beyond hospitals. Community-based care, mental health services, rehabilitation networks, and peer support systems must be integrated into recovery pathways so that care continues where real life actually happens. Healing does not occur in isolation, and systems that treat it as such overlook the very conditions that determine whether recovery is sustained. And finally, medical education must train practitioners not only to cure but to stay, to recognize pauses, guarded laughter, rehearsed smiles, and overly careful answers as signals of ongoing need. Because sometimes the most important part of care begins after there is nothing left to prescribe. Empathy is not pity. Empathy is attention. The attention to notice when someone's recovery looks complete, but their adjustment is still ongoing. To recognize that scars, visible or invisible, are not proof that something is over. They're proof that something continues quietly. And the ellipsis we hear in people's stories is not a failure to speak, it is a signal that healing is still in progress, that care is still needed, that presence still matters. So if there's one thing I hope we remember as students, as professionals, as human beings, it is this. Not every recovery needs intervention, but every recovery needs to be witnessed. And sometimes the most powerful form of care is simply staying long enough for someone to finish their sentence when they are ready. Thank you.